Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
USAA.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Andrew Rimby. This is a special recording that I would first like to thank Barnes & Noble in Clifton for hosting Gregory Maguire, the great and powerful Gregory Maguire of all things Wicked universe. He was signing his new book, Elphie, which is a prequel to Wicked. So Wicked is a prequel to The Wizard of Oz, and Elphie is a prequel to Wicked. So my students, hi, if you're listening, I'm going to make sure I send them this. Have listened to my interview with him when he came on the podcast to deep dive Wicked, since I'm now teaching Wicked. And I'm loving hearing all of their thoughts on the political themes in Wicked. So first, it was such a pleasure to meet Gregory in person for the first time. I have had him on the podcast twice, but, you know, meeting someone in person, you get to see the 4D experience. So that was really exciting. And I didn't know that he was actually going to speak about his inspiration behind creating Elphie, and also talking about his thoughts on the Wicked movie musical. So I recorded a section of his speech, not a speech, but of his conversation, we'll call it. So this is about 9 minutes of him talking about the inspiration behind creating the character of Elphaba. And I also am going to include his response to a question I asked about teaching Wicked to all of you, my students. And he has a really wonderful response about how he thought about his audience for Elphie. Like, I asked him, and you'll hear verbatim my question, but I basically asked him, did he have to change his themes because he knew that he would have probably more children readers or young adult readers because of the popularity of the movie musical? So that's my question to him. I hope you all enjoy this special episode. It's, you know, short, so definitely a great episode to walk to, you know, drive to. Please share it around with all your Wicked friends who just love the movie, who love the movie musical. And also an announcement, which is I'm going to re-release the Smash series with my friend Christian Garcia. We have recapped, I think we're now up to episode 8. We've recapped up to episode 8 of Smash, and we're seeing the musical on Broadway. Next weekend, we're seeing it. So you know we're going to talk about it and have reviews, our own perspective on it. I'm going with my mom, my fiance, Christian's going, Angela, who you all know and love if you've listened to one of the book club episodes, and someone else who is in my close family circle now, but I don't want to let you know who it is just in case they're listening. You never know. Okay, so I can't wait to re-release our Smash episodes. Please listen to the newest Queer as Folk episode. I had on film producer Jonathan Yaskov. It was such an exciting conversation. Just to let you all know, that was recorded when I was still on Long Island, so I was not yet engaged. And just in case my fiance is listening to this episode, you know, you never know. Sometimes he likes to listen when he's working. I've just heard from him. I always like to let him know the timestamp because sometimes he asks me, wait, why did you call me your boyfriend? And I'm like, baby, it's because we weren't engaged yet. Okay. So, just so you all know the behind the scenes, not every episode is always released in the order of the recording. Okay, I hope you all have a great weekend. Enjoy it. The weather here in New Jersey is beautiful. So, until next time, I hope you all enjoy Gregory Maguire's conversation.
Iteration of it. But it's also true that I actually don't need any more attention for my character of Elphaba, or for Glinda, or anybody else that I have invented or somebody else has invented and I have tweaked. I have no need, or I didn't even have any interest in having this published in the wake of the release of the first film. I wrote the book before the film had been scheduled for release, and it just happens to be coming out now, a very luscious and convenient 4 months after Wicked Part 1. Oh well, these things happen. Book actually was seeded 30 years ago, because when I wrote Wicked originally and sent the manuscript to my publisher accepted it and agreed to pay me the amount of money that I hoped I would get for it, which was a nice little portion for somebody with my previous earning history, zilch. And she said, the book is so long, you have to drop some from the beginning. You have to drop about 5% from the first 100 pages. And the easiest thing to do is to take out stuff that has to do with the child growing into a college student. We have to start when she gets at shiz, because that's where the reader's interest really begins to vest. We know we need to know how she's born. It's the birth of a savior, just like the birth of Harry Potter or the birth of King Arthur. Every hero has a birth story, a nativity story, and we need to know about Oz the way you conceive of it. All of that is important, but let's skip over the childhood and get her to shiz so she can meet Glinda and we can start galloping. Well, I wanted to do what my editor said, because I did want her to sign that contract. So I said, okay, I will take out some pages. And I only took out about 3 short scenes. But to me, they were important scenes, because when you consider the history of a hero or an anti-hero, when you consider the history of, let's say, Lee Harvey Oswald, or of Stalin, or of Hitler, or the history of, let's say, Scarlett O'Hara, or, the history of Georgia O'Keeffe, or of Albert Schweitzer. What you want to know is, what happened to them in childhood that turned the stem of their character either this way or that way? What are the pressures that are first exerted in childhood that make the character grow the way that it does? I don't know about you. Is anybody here an avid reader of biographies? Some people are. I like biographies more and more as I get older. But I really find I like best the parts where, Barbra Streisand hasn't yet hit Broadway. I like when she's coming up. I like when she's struggling. I like when she's trying to get into acting classes and doesn't manage it and has to figure out a way around. That teaches me as much about her character as anything else. I like what happens to Chagall in his childhood. I like what happens to Virginia Woolf in her childhood. I already know about her successes, because if she hadn't become successful or important or an historic figure, there wouldn't be a book about her. What I don't know about is how she got to be Virginia Woolf. So I think it's very important. I picked 2 or 3 ages for this book, Elphie. One of them is, as you can see, when she's about 3 years old, 3 or 4. The chronology in Oz is always a little bit iffy. So they don't pay too much attention to that kind of thing. So I'm never really sure exactly what age she is, but she's about 3 or 4 in that chapter that I just read you. I think that's an important age, because it's the age at which children start to be independent and they start to separate from their maternal or paternal units, or whoever is actually taking care of them. They start to individuate in the initial ways. The second time period that I really love about is when children turn about 7. Now, I don't know if any of you are as old as I am, or I don't know if any of you were raised in the traditions I was raised in, but I was raised a Catholic, and I went to Catholic schools and Catholic training in the 60s. And in the 1960s, we were taught, this is pre-Vatican II, but it carried over, we were taught that at about the age of 7, a child is capable of making a moral decision. A child is capable of knowing the difference between right and wrong. A 5-year-old might, eat a couple of cookies from the cookie jar, and when they're asked, did you know that was wrong? Well, they'll just pick yes or no, depending on what word comes into their head first. But at 7, they know what yes or no means, and they know what the word wrong means. So when you're 7, in the Catholic Church, as I was taught, you are considered to be morally developed enough that your behavior has consequence. And you don't have to go to jail necessarily, but you can get a timeout for stealing a cookie when you said you wouldn't, or for lying about it when you did. When my baby brother turned 7, because this was a large Catholic family, his older sister, Annie, said to him, "Joe, you're 7 years old now. Now you can go to hell." And what she meant was, now you're culpable, so watch out. I actually think there's something, even though I don't buy the dogma, I do buy the developmental psychology about what happens when you get to be about 7. I think there's some accuracy to that. It's not chronological, it doesn't happen on the particular birthday, but I think there's something real about it. The next thing that I think is really fascinating is when you have crested through childhood and you are at the far end of what I think of as the golden years of childhood, which is about 2 weeks before the first stages of hormones start to hit your shores. You are sharp, you are attentive, you are intellectually curious, you are capable, and you have no punishment of ego to stop you from doing what you want to do. You are Harriet the Spy. You are just the best you can be as a kid. And then it all goes to hell. Usually in a kind of nice way if you can survive, your teenage years. But right before you become a teenager, you are as strong a child as you will ever be. And I love that. When I was a teacher, I loved teaching 4th grade and 5th grade, and sometimes into 6th grade, because they didn't care about raising their hands and answering a question. They didn't care what they were going to look like in front of their peers. They cared about engaging with me, because I was a person and they were a person. They knew it and I knew it, and we had a great time. Once you start caring what your peers think, you can't raise your hand anymore for about the next 7 years. Your hands are super glued to the back of your spine. So I decided when I wrote Wicked, originally I would take a little tiny episode from those periods of Elphie's life as a child so that I could show you how she could grow up to be ready to go to university at Shiz, and how she could grow up to have a chip on her shoulder and to have things to have to work to survive in university and beyond. She is, as we know if we've seen her in any of her iterations, either on the page, on the stage, or on the silver screen, she is prickly, she is intelligent, she is impassioned, she is impetuous, and she's often wrong. Like most of us, actually, I think. Certainly like me. So, that is where the story came from. I clipped out a couple of segments, I put them in the storeroom of my mind, and just like amaryllis bulbs after Christmas, you can cut them down, you can put them in the basement, you can keep them for a year, and then if you plant them in suitable soil the next year, they will bloom again. I cut out the flowers of the amaryllis 30 years ago from the novel of Wicked, and I put it in my basement storehouse of the mind, not for a year, but for 29 years. When I planted it again, up came the green shoots that said, Elphie is alive, and here she is.
So I'm teaching Wicked right now at Kane University nearby, and my students have been so fascinated. Today we did a whole discussion about the way that you create this propaganda clock of the time dragon element and like connecting it to today's government situation of how can you fall under the incantation of manipulation. and cult-like thinking. So I'm just curious, when you approached Elphie, how did you weigh the maturity level of your theme? Like, did you think about, now that I have such a young audience with the Wicked movie, I'm going to try to veer into a young adult audience? Or did you go back to the root of that adult-oriented theme of the Wicked novel?
That's a really great question. I'm going to try to reproduce it, but I will probably get it wrong. This gentleman is a professor and teaches Wicked in one of his college courses, and they are particularly interested in the use of that thing called the clock of the time dragon and the ways in which it is a machine for propaganda in some ways. It's a way both to distract crowds and also to suggest behaviors that they might follow that are advantageous to somebody, we don't quite know whom, but disadvantageous to the solidity of the community into which the clock of the time dragon rolls. And the question continues from that novel and engaging proposition, which I'm going to think about in the car on the way home, to ask, did you take that same impulse and put it into the novel Elphie, which after all is a prequel of a prequel? And the answer to that erudite and well-composed, long question is no. But there's a reason for it. This is not actually a YA novel. This is an adult novel about a young person. And there is a small distinction. Now, unlike in Wicked, there's not a lot of sex in here, just because the mother exposes her bosom. I mean, let's not get, all hot and bothered about that. There's no sex. There's only one instance of murder, and it's early and quick and not too specific, not too graphic. And it's not even deeply philosophical, but what it is a character study. It's a character study about the soil being prepared so that the force which through the green fuse drives the flower, which is Elphie, can come to fruition. So it has a different ambition than Wicked, which was a somewhat political ambition. Now I'll put an asterisk to your question, because I feel like I should give you more than just no. When the movie was coming out a few months ago, a lot of people who were going to review the movie or who did review the movie decided really to do their homework. And some of them went and bought the novel or got it, in a used bookstore for 75 cents. And that's still purchasing it, unless they stole it from a used bookstore. And they read it. Possibly some of them had read it for the first time or had gotten beyond page 14 for the first time in their lives. And what I found really interesting in several reviews said what this movie makes of Maguire's prophetic novel. This novel is 30 years old. Now in 2025, looking back on how I talked about domination, suppression, about certain kinds of authoritarianism, now it's considered prophetic. I wish it weren't, but here we are. 30 years ago, I thought it was a little retro. I thought it was a little bit too Cold War, or too end of the World War II or something. But as they say, when you're going into Macy's and you go through the revolving door, what goes around comes around. And we are at a moment in history where what Wicked had to say 30 years ago has a new pertinence. And that really, as I think, the baseline of that interesting and satisfying question